Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name's Chris, and this is really the introduction for my up-and-coming upload, which will be out towards the end of next week. It's all about the Sunderland flying boat, and the story for me started when I came across a photograph of what was named as a Sunderland flying over Salcombe Harbour back in 1946. Of course, as soon as I put this up, yeah, sorry, I was just saying that the aircraft that got me thinking about this next film was the Sunderland flying boat, and it came about because a photograph that came up. I think it came from the Salcombe Maritime Museum, and I posted it up on social media, stating what it said on the photograph, that it was a Sunderland flying over Salcombe Harbour in 1946. Well, of course, I was put straight on this fact, and it was actually a short. I've lost it again. Solent. Yeah, sorry, as I was saying, the reason for me sort of embarking on this next film about the Sunderland flying boat was that I came across this photograph from Salcombe Maritime Museum, posted it up on social media, and stated what it said on the photograph, that it was a Sunderland flying boat over Salcombe 1946, and the Sunderland flying boat was called Salcombe. Well, I was put straight on this quite quickly, and of course it turned out that it wasn't in fact a Sunderland, it was a short Solent flying boat, of which they were building these very, very late on in 1945 into 46. They were built really for the civilian passenger market, and interestingly, the Solents that they built all had names that were connected to the water, and this particular flying boat was called Salcombe, which I tracked down, and eventually this particular aircraft was taken out to Australia and was used there for a short while. Sadly, it got damaged and so on, and but it was just an interesting story. It was interesting to delve into the history of the Sunderland flying boat, which of course were quite regular visitors overhead here at Salcombe, because they were based at RAF Mountbatten down in Plymouth, and they were flying regular patrols, often coming up in this direction, heading out across the channel, and then returning after quite an extended journey out into the Atlantic. Then returning to RAF Mountbatten. They couldn't of course land at RAF Bolthead or anything like that, because they were a flying boat. They were essentially designed to land on water. They could be moved on the land, but they had to bolt on on a particularly special set of wheels so they could tow it up the ramps into the hangar. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this film. I found it quite interesting putting it together. So sit tight and enjoy the film. Thank you.
Well, it was a Sunderland flying boat, which, as I'd mentioned, it was a conversion from a pre-war luxury plane. I think they used to have about 12 passengers, and the done thing in those days was to have waterborne craft, because there was plenty of safe lagoons and havens for waterborne craft to land and take off. Airstrips as we know them today were very low on the list. But of course science has proved that an efficient ball bearing system, or a bearing system, probably a roller bearing system with wheels, is heaps ahead of a flying boat, which has got this massive boat hull down in that heavy water, and you've got to have tremendous power to lift that boat portion out of the water so that it can fly as a plane. It had 4 engines. They were not terribly powerful. They were called a Bristol Pegasus. And if one of those engines went, for whatever reason, if it dropped out of its performance, you had trouble. And we did run into one of these periods. We'd come in off a patrol. Our own base at Plymouth was under very heavy snow and a lot of fog, and we weren't able to land. And the aircraft was limping along on these 3 surviving motors. Nowadays, 2 out of 4 is wonderful. You can still keep the whole strength going with modern jets, but one of those Bristol Pegasus motors, if that died, you were in danger. So we were diverted to a place called Calshot, that's to the north of the Isle of Wight. Now, the west end of the Isle of Wight in the English Channel, those who are acquainted would know there's a profusion of big cliffs, white chalk cliffs, called the Needles. And we had dropped right down to a very low altitude. We'd thrown away all the bombs, the guns, everything but the men went over to enable these 3 surviving motors to get us in safely to that diversion base at Calshot. And suddenly the skipper, his name was Laurie Clark, a Flight Lieutenant Clark, and he said, "Oh, hell!" And suddenly he had to veer away because we were heading straight for these needles. So he got us down safely into mountains of snow there at the diversion base. And we had to stay there for a day or 2, I think, until our own base opened up and we were able to fly back to there to have this rotten motor repaired.
Now, moving on post-war, the short Solent that flew over Salcombe back in 1946 moved out to Australia and carried passengers out there, and also the other shorts went on to New Zealand as well.
The Golden Road of the Tropics, the coral route to paradise.
Jack and Ray helped people get to paradise 50 years ago.
Not as sprightly as I used to be.
And this is how they got there, on a Solent flying boat.
There was only 4 of them built. This happens to be the last of the 4 that was built, so it's an icon.
The 4 were built for Teal, the forerunner of Air New Zealand. The coral route took off from Auckland Harbour to Fiji, 7 hours back then instead of today's 3-hour flight, and then island hopping to Samoa, the Cooks, and finally 2.5 days later, Tahiti. There were 9 crew.
Captain, first officer, navigator, flight engineer and radio officer.
And what about in the cabin?
3 or 4.
And 45 very well-off passengers.
Travelling by air usually provides fine appetites, and dining high over the brilliance of the tropic seas is an exhilarating and most enjoyable experience.
And there was more.
Writing materials and smelling salts and eau de cologne.
So that was the sort of the 1950s version of in-flight entertainment.
Absolutely, and what entertainment it was. You made your own.
The £30 ticket was 6 times the average weekly wage. And there was only one class, first class. Oh, plenty of room.
And we'll just lay you back.
Travel was sometimes bumpy, always noisy, but at 3,000 metres you got a great view. The age of flying boats ended in 1960. The Solent's been restored, a memory to a golden past.
There weren't all too many people travelling, and it was quite an adventure for people.
Is starred with Tiare Tahiti.
A time for adventures lost but not forgotten.
Her new name is Fantasy of Flight, and that's just what this Sunderland S-25 Mark V is, the last flying boat of her kind. For the past 4 years, she's been rusting quietly on Southampton water, with no takers for a £1 million price tag. But after some corrosion treatment and a new coat of paint, she gained an airworthiness certificate 6 days ago, ready for a new home in the United States. She was bought by an American millionaire and enthusiast who's building an aviation theme park in Florida. He already has 3 Spitfires, 2 Mosquitoes, and a Lancaster.
It's going to be a fun trip, and I think that scared off a lot of people in purchasing the airplane because it is difficult to operate. But we have a lake in Florida, and we tend to operate it there on a regular basis.
The Sunderland took 10 years to restore and swallowed £2.5 million of Edward Hulton's fortune, built up through his family's publishing empire. After converting the flying boat into a luxurious passenger plane, he put it on the market in 1989. The Sunderland will eventually be returned to her original wartime specification, complete with gun turrets. They operated out of Calshot and Southampton water throughout the war, making the longest daily operational flight to Solent. Sunderlands occupy a very special part of Britain's aviation history. Many of the hundreds who watched today's departure were sad to see the last one go.
Marvellous piece of English engineering, disappearing into the sky, going to America. Great shame, tears in my eyes.
The Americans got to put the money in, it's the biggest problem over here.
The takeoff was a last magnificent goodbye to Britain, her 4 Pratt & Whitney engines fully on song. The Sunderland made a faultless takeoff and then a low-level fly past to cheers on a final journey west.
Hopefully you've enjoyed the short look at the Sunderland flying boat and the history thereafter the Second World War, when they built the short Solent flying boat, of which many went out to Australia and New Zealand, and also the last short Sunderland that left Calshot at Southampton and has gone out to Florida to live with Kermit Weeks, and is still there to this day. So much for listening, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take the greatest of care, all the very best. Cheers for now.